Picture this. It's the bitter winter of 1950.
Right.
And you're driving down this totally desolate stretch of mid-century American highway. Up ahead, like through the frost on your windshield, you see a figure standing on the side of the road.
Just a hitchhiker.
Exactly, a hitchhiker.
Yeah.
And you're a good person, right? Maybe you have your family in the car, so you pull over to help. You unlock the door.
And that simple act of charity basically becomes a death sentence.
Yeah.
Because the man shivering in the cold was William Edward Cook. He's better known to history as Billy Cockeye Cook.
Right.
And he was this spree killer who had just spent 22 days completely terrorizing the American Southwest. The Monster family, a mother, a father, and their 3 young children, they actually pulled over for him.
Which is just terrifying to even think about.
It is. Cook held them hostage for hours, forcing them to drive across state lines before murdering all 5 of them and dumping their bodies down an abandoned mine shaft in Missouri. It's this piece of real-life horror that permanently shattered the whole romantic illusion of the safe, open American road.
It really did. But that forgotten slice of mid-century true crime, I mean, it could have just faded into the archives, but 2 decades later, it was resurrected.
Yeah, in a very unexpected way.
Exactly. It became the literal killer on the road and the very last studio recording Jim Morrison would ever make. The 1971 masterpiece by The Doors, Riders on the Storm. Welcome to Deep Cuts and Deep Thinking.
Today, we are taking you on a journey into the really dark, atmospheric heart of that track.
Our mission for this deep dive, using the stack of sources we've gathered for you, and these range from 1970s studio session logs to mid-century true crime archives, and even like treatises on German existentialism, is to understand exactly how The Doors accidentally wrote the ultimate funeral march for the 1960s.
It's such a dense track,
It is. We're going to deconstruct the song, peel back the layers of its incredibly dense avant-garde philosophy, and explore the radical studio engineering that brought it to life.
And, well, to truly grasp that haunting, rain-soaked sound we hear on the record, we really have to start by looking at the band's reality in late 1970.
Which was a mess, right?
Yeah. Behind the scenes, the foundation of the group was completely crumbling.
Right. Looking at the biographical notes from that period, it's honestly hard to overstate how physically and psychologically depleted Jim Morrison was.
He was in bad shape.
He was. I mean, he was drinking heavily, his health was failing, and he was carrying this massive, crushing weight from his obscenity trial in Miami.
Yeah, he was facing the very real threat of a 6-month prison sentence.
Exactly. Promoters were canceling their concerts left and right. The whole golden utopian era of the 1960s was entirely in the rearview mirror by this point. The band was quite literally on the brink of collapse.
And into this massive pressure cooker steps Paul A. Rothchild. Rothchild had produced the band's first 5 albums. He was essentially the chief architect of their studio sound. So he joins them at Sunset Sound Studios to run through some early, rough demos for what would eventually become the L.A. Woman album.
Right. They're just starting to feel things out.
Exactly. And after hearing their initial attempts at tracks like Love Her Madly and Riders on the Storm, Rothchild does something almost unthinkable in the music business.
He just walks out.
He walks out.
Yeah.
He quits the project entirely.
And the way he did it was so brutal, too. I mean, he famously dismissed their new material as cocktail music and wall-to-wall boredom.
Yeah, he really didn't hold back.
He felt the band was taking a massive step backward, retreating into lazy, middle-of-the-road jazz and blues instead of pushing the boundaries of rock.
Which, for a rock band at the height of their fame, that is a completely devastating critique.
Oh, absolutely.
But the psychological effect it had on them was actually really profound. Because instead of falling apart, they felt this sudden, strange liberation.
Right.
They just packed up their gear, left the expensive, high-pressure environment of Sunset Sound, and retreated to their own private rehearsal space. It was this 2-story building at 8512 Santa Monica Boulevard that they simply called the Doors Workshop.
And the distinction between a formal studio and a workshop is super critical here.
Oh, definitely.
I always compare Rothschild's exit to like a strict, big-budget Hollywood director walking off a movie set.
That's a great way to look at it.
Right. Imagine a director who has been controlling every single frame, forcing the actors to do 60 takes of a single line. When that director storms out, the initial shock fades, and the actors realize they can finally just breathe.
Yeah, they can finally relax.
Exactly. They decide to go indie. They start trusting their own raw instincts without the corporate clock just ticking in the background.
And that shift in environment changed absolutely everything about how the music was recorded.
Because they brought in Bruce Botnick.
Yeah, they brought in their longtime engineer, Bruce Botnick, to co-produce, and they set up the recording console right there in their hangout spot.
Which was literally just a rehearsal room.
Yeah, we were talking about a room with shag carpet, low lighting, and this familiar live club-like vibe. There was no red light anxiety. Morrison didn't even have a proper soundproof vocal booth.
This is my favorite part. Where did he record?
He literally stood in the bathroom doorway holding his live tour microphone to record his parts.
I just love that, standing in a bathroom doorway. Which I guess brings us to the music itself, because Rothschild's insult, calling it cocktail music, is actually like the skeleton key to understanding the whole track.
It really is, because the band wasn't trying to make a booming stadium rock anthem at all.
Right. I mean, in 1971, you have Led Zeppelin dropping absolute heavy metal bombs, and massive distorted rock is just dominating the landscape.
But the Doors went in the exact opposite direction. They were inventing a genre that critics would later call dark desert jazz.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the sheer musical subversion of that choice is fascinating. Every instrument on Riders on the Storm is playing a role you wouldn't expect in a traditional rock song.
Yeah, let's look at the mechanics of what Ray Manzarek is doing on the Fender Rhodes electric piano. He's playing in a Dorian mode.
Let's break that down for the listener, because Dorian sounds like a purely academic term, but it has a very specific emotional effect.
It does. So Dorian is a musical scale that feels inherently unresolved.
Okay.
Think of a standard minor scale, which usually feels definitively sad or dark. The Dorian mode takes that minor scale, but raises the sixth note.
And what does that do?
That one mechanical change lifts the sadness into something much more ambiguous. It makes the music feel like it's floating or wandering. It never quite lands on a satisfying resolution, which keeps you, the listener, in this constant state of subtle suspense.
Wow. And it isn't just the scale either. It's the physical technique Manzarek uses.
Right, the arpeggios.
Yeah, he plays these legato arpeggios, which means he's playing the notes of a chord individually, but smoothly connecting them without any break in the sound. It physically emulates the audio of raindrops sliding down a window pane.
It's brilliant.
He was actually channeling the jazz vibraphonist Lionel Hampton to create this watery, noir atmosphere. I mean, it literally sounds like weather.
And weather is the perfect word for it, really, because John Densmore, the drummer, completely abandons the heavy rock backbeat.
Yeah, no heavy drumsticks.
Exactly. Instead of pounding the snare drum with wooden sticks to drive a rigid tempo, he uses wire brushes. He sweeps them across the snare to create this soft, swishing bed of sound.
And the cymbal work, too.
Yeah, he utilizes a riveted ride cymbal, the large cymbal, with small metal pins loosely installed in it. When you strike it, those pins vibrate against the brass, creating a continuous, sizzling wash that sustains much longer than a normal cymbal crash.
So when you listen to Densmore's drumming on this track, you aren't hearing a beat you can nod your head to. You are hearing an atmosphere that breathes. It expands and contracts with Morrison's vocal phrases, just completely enveloping you.
And then within that atmosphere, you have Robbie Krieger on guitar.
In an era defined by massive guitar heroics.
Right, 20-minute solos everywhere. But Krieger exercises extreme restraint. He plays these very clean, short, plucked lines with a heavy tremolo effect.
Which kind of rapidly modulates the volume, right?
Exactly. It rapidly modulates the volume of the note to give it a shimmering, vibrating quality. He isn't driving the song or trying to stand out. He's acting as a glimmering texture in the rain. Just another strand in the mist.
The restraint is phenomenal. So we have this anti-stadium rock arrangement. How did such a quiet, almost anti-rock setup manage to capture so much dread? Because the feeling of dread you get from the song wasn't just captured in the musical notes.
No, it wasn't. It was engineered into the actual fabric of the mix. Bruce Botnick, the engineer, executed some absolute pioneering sound design.
Yeah, the rain and the thunder that you hear opening the track, that wasn't just some spooky Halloween gimmick they slapped over the master tape at the last minute.
Far from it. Botnick pulled a sound effects reel of a thunderstorm from the Elektra Records library. But what he did with it was incredibly complex for 1971.
Right, no laptops back then.
Exactly. You have to remember, they didn't have digital audio workstations or Pro Tools. Botnick was physically taking razor blades to magnetic tape, cutting the thunderclaps, and weaving them rhythmically into the song.
That's insane.
He and the band essentially played God with the weather. They mapped it out so that the thunder hits at specific musical intervals, perfectly in sync with Krieger's guitar licks or Densmore's cymbal crashes.
They framed the entire piece within that storm. The song fades in with the rain, the band enters the weather system, they play, and then the music fades out, leaving only the sound of the storm continuing.
It's very cinematic.
It is. It makes you feel like the music, and by extension, human existence, is just a temporary, fragile event inside a massive, indifferent universe that will keep churning long after we are gone.
And, you know, the environmental sound wasn't the only haunting element engineered into the track. There's also an actual ghost voice.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
So Morrison recorded his main lead vocal, standing in that bathroom doorway. Once they had the take, he went back and recorded a second vocal track where he simply whispered the entire lyric.
Every single word.
Every single word, start to finish.
The whisper track. When I first read about how this was mixed, it blew my mind. Botnick took that whispered vocal, turned the volume down incredibly low, and mixed it just slightly offset from the main singing voice.
Yeah, and it creates a profound psychoacoustic effect.
How does that work, exactly?
Well, by shifting the whisper just a few milliseconds out of phase with the main vocal, the human brain processes it as spatial depth. Your ear interprets that tiny delay as physical proximity.
So it feels real.
It creates a binaural 3D shadow. It feels as though there is a second person standing directly behind your shoulder in a dark room, whispering into your ear while Morrison sings from the front of the stage.
Okay, knowing that Jim Morrison died in Paris just a few weeks after this single was released to the public, I mean, it forces a question. When you look at the choices here, the funeral-like pacing, the fading storm, the literal ghost whisper, did he know? Was this an intentional farewell? Was he haunting his own track on purpose?
It's so easy to fall into the trap of retroactively mythologizing artists. We project our knowledge of their tragic ends backward onto their work.
Right, it fits the narrative.
But we have to separate the historical timeline from the biographical reality. Historically, yes, this was the absolute last song Jim Morrison ever recorded in the studio.
But biographically?
Biographically, there is zero evidence he intended as a goodbye. Surviving band members and friends who saw him in Paris noted that he was vibrant, writing poetry, talking about future film projects, and planning to return to music.
So he wasn't wrapping up his affairs.
No, not at all. The whispered vocal was purely an artistic choice, a brilliant studio technique meant to emphasize the song's theme of the double self, the killer, and the victim. The fact that it became his literal swan song is just an incredibly eerie, posthumous coincidence.
We really do bring our own context to the art. But to be fair, the art itself actively invites that kind of dark projection because the lyrics are steeped in some incredibly dense avant-garde philosophy.
Oh, absolutely.
Looking through the notes, I kind of hit a wall when we got to the 1920s German philosophy. How do we draw a straight line from a jazz rock jam session to Martin Heidegger?
Well, the leap from a jam session to existentialism is entirely Morrison. The song actually originated as the band was just messing around in the studio, playing the old 1948 cowboy ballad, Ghost Riders in the Sky.
Right, a song about damn cowboys chasing a red-eyed herd of cattle.
Exactly. Morrison took that loose, drifting cowboy structure and twisted it into an exploration of the human condition. The opening lines of Riders on the Storm are, "Into this house we're born, into this world we're thrown."
Thrown. That specific word choice is the linchpin, right?
It is. That is a direct invocation of a concept Morrison studied during a 1963 philosophy lecture at Florida State University.
The Heidegger connection.
Yes. The concept is Geworfenheit, a German term coined by Martin Heidegger, which literally translates to thrownness. It's the idea that human beings are hurled arbitrarily into a chaotic world without their consent.
Think about your own life for a second. You don't ask to be born. You don't choose your historical era, your family's economic status, or the cultural storms that happen to be raging when you arrive. You are simply thrown into the middle of the narrative, and you have to scramble to make sense of it.
And he pairs that heavy German existentialism with the work of another philosopher, Ernst Bloch.
What was his angle?
Bloch wrote extensively about the tragedy of passive existence. So Morrison sings like a dog without a bone, an actor out on loan. It's a scathing critique of just going through the motions.
Right, if you just let the world act upon you.
Exactly. You're playing a part in a script you didn't write. You're an actor, but you're out on loan to someone else's production. You don't even own your own performance.
It is such a bleak, terrifying view of the world. You are thrown into a universe where an ordinary hitchhiker like Billy Cook can slip into your car and destroy your entire family in an instant.
Yeah.
It is a world governed by randomness, violence, and storms. But what fascinates me is that the song doesn't end in pure nihilism. Right at the end, it takes this unbelievable pivot.
It really changes gears.
The final verse shifts the tone entirely. Girl, you gotta love your man. Take him by the hand and make him understand the world on you depends.
It transforms into a desperate humanist plea.
It really does. I compare the structure of this song to a dark, paranoid thriller.
How so?
Well, the protagonist spends 2 hours running from killers, weathering the rain, getting beaten down by the cruelty of the world. And right at the climax, they have this revelation. The universe is completely meaningless, the storms are never going to stop, and the killers are always out there. Yeah. So the only way to create meaning, the only way to anchor yourself so you don't blow away, is to reach out and hold the hand of the person sitting next to you.
You build a fragile shelter out of love in the middle of the void.
Exactly.
The world depends on that human connection. And what makes that realization so profound is the specific cultural timing of it.
Oh, the timing is staggering.
That plea for connection arrived at the exact moment when the entire American counterculture felt completely unmoored and adrift.
Because the single drops in June 1971, the bright, optimistic summer of love is dead and buried.
It was long gone.
The hippie dream has been absolutely shattered by the Manson family murders, by the violence at the Altamont Music Festival, and by the grinding, endless fatigue of the Vietnam War.
And the open road itself had changed.
Yeah, the open road, which writers like Jack Kerouac and the Beats had celebrated for a decade as the ultimate symbol of American freedom and discovery, it had turned into a hunting ground. Hitchhiking wasn't an adventure anymore. It was a profound vulnerability.
The culture was just exhausted. The idealism was gone. And right into that cultural exhaustion, Riders on the Storm enters the Billboard Hot 100.
And then the unthinkable happens.
Yeah. That very same week, on July 3, 1971, Jim Morrison is found dead in a bathtub in Paris.
It's chilling.
The song instantly transcends being just a piece of commercial music. It becomes a myth. It becomes the definitive funeral march for the 1960s.
Yet, despite being so deeply tied to the death of the 60s, this song refuses to stay buried in 1971.
It really has incredible staying power.
It has this crazy, timeless modularity to it. I mean, in the 1980s, that spooky atmospheric space spawned the entire dark wave and neo-psychedelia movement. Bands like Echo and the Bunnymen built their whole aesthetic around it.
And the movie industry picked it up, too.
Yeah, it directly inspired the tone of the 1986 horror film The Hitcher with Rutger Hauer. And then we hit one of the strangest pivots in the notes. 2004 happens.
The video game generation discovers the Doors.
Exactly. Snoop Dogg and the producer Fredwreck get hold of the track and do a hip-hop remix, and it becomes the main theme song for the blockbuster video game Need for Speed, Underground 2.
Which is such a wild jump.
Millions of kids who maybe had absolutely no idea who Jim Morrison was are suddenly drifting digital cars around neon-lit, rain-soaked city streets, perfectly synchronized to the sound of Ray Manzarek's E. Dorian electric piano.
It's amazing.
So what does this all mean? How do we draw a line from a 7-minute jazz rock song about a 1950s serial killer and 1920s German philosophy and have it work just as perfectly in the soundtrack of a 2004 street racing video game?
Well, I think it translates so perfectly because Riders on the Storm functions less like a traditional pop song and more like a psychological environment.
A psychological environment.
Yeah, it's a sonic sandbox. The core themes drifting through the dark, the presence of danger, existential uncertainty, the feeling of moving rapidly through a landscape where you aren't fully in control. Those are universal human experiences.
They apply to any era.
Exactly. Whether you're a family pulling over on Route 66 in 1950, a generation surviving the cultural collapse of 1971, or a teenager driving a digital car through a simulated rainy city in 2004, the fundamental feeling of being a writer resonates.
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
The track provides a psychological weather system that any generation can step into and project their own anxieties onto.
It is the ultimate dark canvas. You bring your own storm to it.
Which leaves us with a final thought to consider, circling back to Heidegger's concept of being thrown into the world.
What do you mean?
Today, we don't worry as much about hitchhikers on lonely highways, but we have been thrown into a new kind of storm, an era of relentless digital chaos, algorithmic feeds, and profound global uncertainty.
The internet is our new open road.
And it is full of invisible passengers. It makes you wonder, in an age where algorithms curate our realities, feed us our fears, and quietly rise along in our pockets, who are the invisible hitchhikers we are letting into our digital cars today?
That's a scary thought.
We didn't ask for the chaos of the present moment, so the song challenges you to ask yourself, when you find yourself thrown into a storm you cannot control, are you just an actor out on loan? Or do you reach out, find a hand to hold, and anchor yourself to someone else against the wind?
If you found this podcast interesting, please like and subscribe. Thank you for joining us today.